Thank you so much for joining us for our second annual Veterans Edition of the Patient Advocacy Coffee Chat here at BIO. We really are so happy and honored to have you here. And today we're going to hear from some really amazing guests just to talk about all kinds of issues that affect those veterans, but also those who are currently serving our nation. So thank you again for joining us. Before we kick off, I'd like to tee up opening comments by John Crowley. He is a BIO board member, the CEO of Amicus Therapeutics, and also a very proud U.S. Navy veteran. And he recorded some comments for us to share with you today.
Hi, I'm John Crowley. I'm the chairman and CEO of Amicus Therapeutics, and it's a real privilege and an honor to be able to kick off this session on Veterans Day for biotechnology and patient advocacy. In some ways, I feel like the passions of my life have kind of collided with biotechnology, patient advocacy, and the military. I had the honor to serve in the United States Navy early in my career, and then after September 11th, to sign up again for the Navy Reserve, where I served for 11 years as a naval intelligence officer with the Joint Special Operations Command and with the Central Intelligence Agency. I played a very small role in the global war on terror, working with and supporting some of the greatest warriors that the world has ever known. These men and women were extraordinary. And again, wearing the cloth of our nation was something that we didn't take lightly, nor should we have, but it was something that we gave thanks for every day. So for this community to come together in biotechnology, to reflect upon and to think about ways in which we can support those who have served in the military is something I'm deeply, deeply grateful for. During the course of those 11 years in the Navy Reserve, I had a chance to serve on 3 active duty tours, including a combat tour in Afghanistan. Our job was principally to find, capture, and kill terrorists who had threatened the United States. When I saw the work that our teams would do together, in many ways, it actually reminded me of the greater purpose and the mission that we all do in biotechnology, to try to make the world a better place. In the military, it was also to make the world a safer place. I also thought about my fellow veterans, the men and women coming home, some of whom didn't come home, and those who did, many who didn't come home whole, who came home with either mental health challenges or physical disabilities from the wounds of war. We think about ways in which we support each other in the military, but I also think about more broadly how the communities, our lives, our families will support them. Every time I had a chance to deploy or to work in the military and intelligence communities, I often thought about and prayed for my family that they be safe, and I gave thanks for the sacrifice that they would make to enable myself and others to serve, but more broadly for us again to think about ways in which we can all serve. You don't have to serve in the military or wear a uniform to be a great citizen. Most of us don't. But to think about just on this day, how we can work together and think about ways to give back to those who have served. When I was rotating out of Afghanistan in 2011 after a deployment, I was waiting in a facility at the Bagram airfield, and we were waiting for several hours for an Air Force plane to take us home. And I remember looking up at a poster. It had been there for a number of years, pretty faded at the time, and it was a silhouette of U.S. troops. And I looked up at it, and it said simply, "Live a life worthy of their sacrifice." I thought about it in that moment. I took a picture of it, and I still have that picture on my desk today. It's something I try to think about and give thanks and gratitude for, but also to think about ways that I can support our fellow veterans. And so for me, again, to have our community in biotechnology think about ways to support those who have served. It's something I'm deeply, deeply grateful for. And this whole notion of service and sacrifice is something incredibly important for all of us. It's what we do every day in biotechnology to support people living with disease and to enhance their lives in different ways. But that bigger sense of mission, of purpose, it was very clear to us in the military, and it's equally clear in biotechnology. So I think it's just great that they come together today. It's something I've carried forward with me into our company at Amicus and hope to carry forward through my career in biotechnology. That singular focus on mission and purpose for patients makes this also a great honor of my life. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you for thinking about all who have served. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thanks so much, Megan, for teeing that up. One thing that John doesn't mention in the video, but many of you may know already, John and his family have been on a mission for over 20 years to identify a treatment for Pompe disease. Both of his children were born with a very rare disease, Pompe, and you can read more about that. We will have a piece on that in Good Day Bio, I believe, coming up as well. So not only a veteran, but also a veteran of the struggles that so many of us fight for, and that is identifying treatments for untreatable and rare conditions. And in this case, he was doing it as a dad. So with that, we'll go ahead into our discussion. I'm going to sort of mini interview each of our 4 panelists, and then we'll have some Q&A and some conversation. But feel free to pipe in if you have questions as we go through this. I'm going to start with you, Eileen. Eileen is Deputy Director of Government Affairs for the National Military Family Association. Her primary area of focus is healthcare, so we're very happy to have her here today. And her expertise includes the military health system, TRICARE, and behavioral health care. So we'd love to hear more about you and your work, and in particular, if you can sort of lay the groundwork for us on, so what is TRICARE, which is for currently serving members of the military, and how is that different from VA?
Sure, Michelle, and thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to be here and speak with this group. I'm really excited about this conversation. Again, my name is Eileen Huck, and I am Deputy Director of Government Relations with the National Military Family Association. These issues are also personal to me, as I'm a military spouse. My husband retired a couple years ago after 29 years in the Navy. So I'm not just interested in TRICARE from a professional standpoint, but I'm also a TRICARE beneficiary. And I do think it's important to distinguish between the VA health system and the military health system. The military health system provides care, as you said, to currently serving service members, their families, retirees, and that would be people who are either medically retired or retired after serving a full 20-year or more career, and surviving family members. The military health system is broken down into 2 parts. There's what we call the direct care system, which consists primarily of hospitals and clinics operating on military installations. And that's complemented by the purchase care system, which is a network of civilian providers that's managed by 2 regional managed care support contractors. The majority of service members receive the bulk of their care through the direct care system, at military treatment facilities. If you're a retiree or a surviving family member, you may be looking for your care through the purchase care system. The direct care system also, depending on where you are, may not have all the specialties or specialists that you might need, which would be another reason why, as a family member, you might be referred out into the purchase care system. As part of my job, I monitor issues with access to care, and that's something that we continue to be concerned about, particularly when it comes to access to mental and behavioral health care. There are documented issues, particularly in pediatrics, but really across the board, with problems accessing mental and behavioral health care. The VA is a totally separate system that serves veterans, mostly with service-connected healthcare, although there are certainly VA clinics and hospitals providing the broad range of care to our nation's veterans. That's kind of the 30,000-foot view. I'm happy to go into more detail or answer any questions.
Sure. And talk a little bit about your current role. I was compelled by the work you do with the camp for kids.
So That's not my personal role, but it's something that I'm really proud of at the National Military Family Association. You know, advocacy is really at the heart of what we do, but we also offer a range of programs to meet the needs of military families. And one of our, our oldest and probably best known program is our Operation Purple program, which started off and continues as a summer camp serving military connected kids. And it's a great way for military kids to get away for a week of summer camp, connect with other military kids, which can be really important, especially, you know, for kids who maybe don't know anybody else who has a deployed mom or dad. Since developing our Operation Purple camps, we've moved on to develop programs serving the family as a whole. We offer family retreats, which are primarily for families reconnecting following a deployment. And we also have what we call Operation Purple Healing Adventures, which are weekend retreats for families who've experienced the illness or injury of a service member, and give them the opportunity to spend some quality time together out in nature and recover and reconnect. So those programs are, you know, we're all really proud of them and how they've been able to serve military families. We've served over 64,000 military kids since Operation Purple camps were launched in 2004.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing about that. I saw a big smile on Maureen's face. I know she can vouch for the camps, and I'm sure we'll talk about that when we get to Maureen. So next, I'd love to hear from Allie Manson. I think she is well known and loved in the advocacy arena as part of the team at Zero, the End of Prostate Cancer, previously having served at the Optometry Association and Prevent Blindness as well. So we're really excited to see you here and would love to hear about your work and some pretty exciting programs that you all are working on.
Thanks, Michelle. At Zero, we are the leading national nonprofit dedicated to ending prostate cancer. Full stop. That is our entire goal. And you don't end prostate cancer without also addressing the disparities involved, right? You can't end it for everyone without looking at those populations that are most impacted. Veterans are diagnosed at about a rate of 1 in 5 compared to about 1 in 8 in the general population. And I think people sometimes think about prostate cancer as, quote, a good cancer, right? That it is caught early, very survivable. But what I hear over and over really from our community, from our patients, is that's a fallacy, right? There is no good cancer. There is no scenario where it's not a big deal and treatment's easy and you're just fine. So we do have a specific effort focused on veterans. And we've got a couple of activities, and I'll mention two priorities for us right now. So we do have a legislative priority I'll get to in a moment, but we also just completed a survey of veterans about their prostate cancer experience. We had over 1,500 responses this summer, and we learned things like, among veterans without a prostate cancer diagnosis, only, actually a surprise, what felt to me high, 70% had actually had a PSA test at some point, but only a little more than half had had a conversation with their doctor about their prostate cancer risk, right? And if 1 in 5 is your risk kind of stat, 70% for getting a PSA test seems low, and half talking to their doctor about their risk also seems low. We also found out that people who were diagnosed with prostate cancer, only about 30% of them reported having a conversation with their doctor prior to their diagnosis. Right, so prostate cancer may not have symptoms. You're going to rely heavily on the most common screening tool, the PSA test, and we know that it's the most commonly diagnosed cancer within the Veterans Health Administration. Right, it is everywhere in this population. I just want to mention a couple of other highlights from the survey, and I'll apologize. We'll be doing a briefing on this survey in, I think, early December, but we don't have the full analytics back. So I'm giving kind of high level findings that don't do any cross-referencing across multiple questions, which I would love to be able to say, based on whether they were treated in the VA or outside the VA, this answer is more common. But for the moment, I'm just going to give a couple of high-level points. And first, I'm just going to say overall, veterans with prostate cancer reported satisfaction with their treatment around a rate of 27%. So it was a scale of 1 to 100, and the average response was about 27%, which I think we'd all agree that's a failing grade, no matter how you slice it. We know they have a hard time understanding their treatment options, regardless of what they might receive in terms of their care or what they might hypothetically have access to if they knew about it. But they do have a hard time getting the information they need. And when it comes to some of the more advanced treatment options, so when it comes to clinical trials, about 20% of veterans have talked to their doctor about a clinical trial option. When it comes to genetic and genomic testing that help to better stratify their risk and to better understand what more precise treatment options might be available to them, the overwhelming majority of vets had never spoken to their doctor about genetic or genomic testing options, but the ones that did, almost all of them chose to use those tools, right? So we know that if they have the choice, it's something that they find improves their care. I'm really looking forward to seeing the analysis that looks at, who responded yes to that question and what their satisfaction was. But I don't have it yet. So please look for an email, look for an opportunity later this year. And the survey is really going to help inform us at Zero in terms of our next policy priorities, right? How do we improve care for veterans with prostate cancer and those who don't have prostate cancer yet? I don't know they have prostate cancer yet. We're working right now with a number of our partners, I think some of whom are on this call, in support of legislation that creates a clinical pathway at the VA for veterans with prostate or for prostate cancer. That is a tool that will improve access to the various treatment options on a set timeline to ensure better access to care across the country, more equitable and reliable access across the country, because we know that the VA offers some of the very best prostate cancer care in the country. There is a precision oncology program that offers clinical research that really does improve outcomes for those with advanced disease. But if you're not in the local area for one of those precision oncology program centers, it's a different story. And so the clinical pathway will help to improve access, level the playing field for veterans, whether they're in Des Moines, Iowa, or LA, right? Regardless. We are hopeful we'll see actually that bill pass this year, knock on wood. If I say that out loud, it's probably a huge mistake. But Congressman Neil Dunn is a urologist actually from Florida, and he has been the lead on the bill in the House. And we also, Senators Moran and Tester have been the lead in the Senate. So we're hopeful, right? Knock on wood, that will be a great tool for really improving patient outcomes and care for those veterans. So those are kind of our highlights right now.
I'm so struck by your sort of what your survey findings that 27% of patients were satisfied with their care, and yet at the same time, the VA does have some of the best prostate cancer care available. So it sounds like it really speaks to the geography issue and whether or not somebody's close to a site. Would you say that's fair? I
want to be careful to say that yet until the analytics team has really gone through the data. I am not a statistician, and I want to be careful, but I think we can at least take away that satisfaction is variable and that there are going to be a lot of factors that play into it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing it stratified by where they receive their care, where they live, that kind of thing. And so I'm hesitant to commit to that, but I did find it striking.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that information. So we will turn now to Mark Gibbons, again, somebody that many of us have known and loved for many years, a leader in the caregiver advocacy and elder advocacy space, CEO of RetireSafe, and very proud veteran. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. I served 10 years in the Army. I was 5 enlisted, 5 as an officer. I had the pleasure of commanding some of the best men and women in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I am in contact with, well, almost all of them still. We get together and we have reunions, but that was some of the best times that I've had, was serving with these people from all over the country, learning different ways of life and understanding where their upbringing is. But the military is such a fantastic family and community. And as some of our organizations and nonprofits try to work with the military community, we have to understand they're a very strong knit family, and they just don't let anybody come in. So if you don't speak their language, they can sniff you a mile away. But what I want to talk about is I do go to the VA once a year for screening for Gulf War syndrome. And so I go to the VA, local VA here in DC. The things that we're concerned about here at RetireSafe is that, and speaking to our veterans that are members, is access, trying to get into the system. Once they get in, the quality of care is just incredible, but they never see the same doctor. The high turnover is incredible because a lot of them are contractors, but it is just trying to get them in. And so there was a quote that I like that says, and it hasn't to do with veterans, but you can apply it. It's a country is judged on how well they treat their old people. Well, I also like to say how well they treat their veterans. Right now, we're not doing a great job. We can do better, I think, with the older Americans and also our veterans. But again, now, if anybody wants to ask questions about the Army Air Force game this weekend or the Army Navy game coming up, I'll be glad to talk about that. And, always go Army. So.
Thanks so much, Mark. And we will talk a little bit as we go through the conversation about access to treatments. And I know that's a challenge and challenge in the urology community as well for the veterans community, as we talked about. So last but definitely not least, Maureen Elias, who, again, those of you who work in the veteran space know Maureen well. She's an incredible woman, a mom of 3, a veteran in her own right, who did suffer injuries, and she'll talk a little bit about that. But I think more than anything, she's just probably one of the most enthusiastic advocates for the veterans community that I've ever known. And we'd love to hear from you now, Maureen.
Thanks, Michele. Thanks so much for the opportunity. And thank you all for making time to tune in. I know that Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and honor that you took the time to come today. I do want to, before I start, just put a disclaimer out. I'm here on my own time and in my personal capacity, not representing the organization I work for. And also, for those of you that knew him, Bernie Edelman with Vietnam Veterans of America passed away yesterday. So I'll be sure to share any memorial information with Michele as I learn it, so that those who want to honor him can. So to start out with, I am an Army veteran, so yes, go Army. I met and married the love of my life in AIT, which is your job training in the military, which comes with a very high divorce rate. And luckily, we've survived for 20 years. But fortunately, I got hurt both in basic training and in AIT. And those injuries just kind of continued to degrade, especially because at the time, as a woman, military healthcare providers just weren't as likely to listen to our concerns about pain. And so it wasn't until 5 years after my injury that I even got an X-ray. So what had happened was I was doing sit-ups outside, had hit a rock, and little tiny pieces of my spinal column, or the bones in my spine, had broken and then fused onto other pieces of my spine because no one took the time to X-ray or listen to what was going on with me. So unfortunately, and very sadly, it ended a military career that I'd planned to finish until retirement. The timing worked out well because I ended up having 3 children who all fell on the autism spectrum. So I spent 10 years as a stay-at-home mom, just caring for my kids and advocating for what they needed. And at the time, autism was not a household word. So it was a lot of education, a lot of criticism from parents telling me that I just needed to spank my kids more and what a bad mom I was. But rather than get angry, I got educational. And that served me well. In 2017, I graduated with a master's in mental health counseling and went to work at Vietnam Veterans of America, where for about 2 years, I did a lot of advocacy work, helping to educate healthcare providers, not within the VA, but outside of the VA. I traveled to about 13 different medical conferences in 1 year. And every time I would ask the attendees, do you see veterans in your clinic? And the answer was always, I don't think so. And the truth is 1 in every 7 patients they see is going to be a veteran, but they aren't asking the question. And if they aren't asking the question, then that means that they don't know about our service-connected conditions. They aren't asking about our toxic exposures. They don't know about our higher risks for certain cancers and other diseases and disorders. And so that was super concerning. And so I realized that information and education was really important, but I wanted to get more aggressively involved in politics. So I pivoted to a role over at Paralyzed Veterans of America, where I served as Associate Legislative Director of Government Relations. And there I had the opportunity to discuss the intersection of disability, along with all of the other issues that you all are aware of and that we're here to talk about today. And then from there, I realized I wanted to get my hands as in the grease as I could. So just recently, I took a job on Capitol Hill and I serve as a PSM for the House Veterans Affairs Committee. So having that nice, strong background in healthcare, understanding the impact of veterans who are using the military healthcare facility like I do, and also using the VA healthcare facility, and kind of the issues that come along with that have been kind of the work I'm doing on the side in helping to understand a really special population, and that's military spouses who are also veterans, because we have a lot of intersections that no one is really paying attention to, and some unique challenges as we go through life. As a little fun tidbit about me, I also in my volunteer time teach storytelling to veterans, and I'm really passionate about storytelling because I think the more we teach veterans to tell their stories, the better advocates we become for our own health, because it unlocks the ability for us to explain to our doctors what's going on, what we're feeling, and how it came to be. So that's me in a nutshell.
And I committed to the audience, you would talk a little bit about your experience with Operation Purple.
Oh, yes.
So tell us a little bit.
Sure. So we actually got to participate in 2 of the programs that Eileen mentioned. We did, when my husband returned from Afghanistan, we did the family retreat. And that was a really special experience. We made things like a family flag. The children went off and played with other kids while my husband and I went through like group couples therapy. And it was just a really nice opportunity to reconnect, especially because when they come home, sometimes, what they've been through and what they've seen, they tend to lock inside and stop conversing. And so it really helped open up communication channels. So it was a beautiful welcome home for my husband. And then for my kids, we have served in a lot of non-traditional assignments where we don't live on military posts. And so it was really their first opportunity to engage with other military kids. And they loved every minute of it. And understanding that my kids are on the spectrum, they loved the opportunity to interact with other kids. They went kayaking, they learned to shoot a bow and arrow. They learned all kinds of different games to play. And what my youngest, my daughter, came home and she's like, Mom, it was so neat to meet other kids who know what I've gone through. And some of those relationships, I think she was 12 and she's 17 now, some of those relationships have persisted, and it was just such a wonderful opportunity. It's a great program, and I will sing its praises anytime I get the opportunity, because it really just lit their fire and kept them going, especially because we moved right after the Operation Purple camp, and we've moved, I think, 10 times in the 20 years that he served. So we've had a lot of moves. So it's a great program.
Excellent. That's so great to hear. So now let's turn to kind of a group conversation, and definitely anybody who's participating in the audience, please weigh in as well. We've talked about, obviously, the veterans community is one that all of us owe such a debt of gratitude to. And in some cases, however, it sounds like there may not be as much of a opportunity to really seek care and get care. And so I think we talked about identifying, I don't want to say network adequacy, that's more of a insurance-y term, but accessing to to healthcare itself, physicians? Mark, you mentioned that you rarely see the same person twice. And I think, Allie, when we talked earlier, it sounds like there's a real challenge in individuals finding care. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, go ahead, Allie, you can go first.
Thanks, Mark. You know, we hear from our patient population, from our veterans specifically, stories about, you know, fighting, right? Not their time in the service, but their time fighting the VA to get the care that they need, especially if they weren't successful on an initial treatment, or the first treatment they were on had side effects that were really challenging to live with. You know, I spoke to a veteran who said he spent 2 years going from Columbia, South Carolina to Chicago, Illinois, to back to Atlanta to try to get the radiation seeds implanted that he needed. And then to deal with some of the side effects that he had. He had some significant urinary incontinence side effects that, you know, are pretty darn hard to live with. And it was really challenging to resolve that. And it did involve being an advocate for himself, right? Finding a community of people who could help, because that's part of it, right? Is that he didn't even know that he didn't have to live with those side effects, that there were options that could fix them, because prostate cancer is a hard thing to talk about, right? Those kinds of side effects are hard for men to talk about. And he didn't feel like he had good choices, and he didn't feel like he had good education. So it wasn't until he found a community of other people with his disease, right? He found support groups, he found other networking tools to hear, shoot, you figured out how to do that. And what's more, you figured out how to get through the VA with that. And it just, and we hear that kind of story over and over again. So I would love to say that, you know, we're worried about the details of coverage for specific high-level treatments, but to be honest, you know, what we hear more about is just making sure that patients have the education they need to make the right choices, and then helping them find even some of what we might consider the more basic or common treatments, and solving the side effects. I feel like that's one that it's very easy to overlook.
You're right, Allie. And the veterans I speak to, sometimes they feel that they have very limited choices in regards to drug plans or treatments, and they feel that they can't really push back to ask more questions because it's taken them so long to get into the system and so luckily some of them are dual eligible. They have VA and they have Medicare. So what drugs they cannot maybe get through the VA, they qualify through Medicare, but that shouldn't be the case. Mm-hmm. So it's hard sometimes for a veteran who's just in the VA system to really ask those questions that you and I would ask, you know, well, are there other treatment options, or do I have access to this? I mean, there are ways that you can get access. I remember, Maureen, I guess maybe about a year ago, we were talking, and you were talking about there are ways to get medications that may not be on the formulary. But I mean, to me, that our veterans are worried that they feel like they have limited access and they're scared to push back, so they really don't have the freedom to go and seek the care that they really want or need.
Mm-hmm.
If I could add to that too, I think, you know, part of the equation is two things in the military culture. One is the bootstrap mentality, right? We're taught drink water, take ibuprofen, and suck it up. And so we tend to just suffer through things because that's what you're taught to do in the military, especially, you know, a decade or so ago and prior to, you didn't go to the facility unless you were dying because you were not treated well, nor were you treated kindly. I think there's been a shift to try to make healthcare, you know, better, but there really are like patch them up and send them back, you know, focused. And so especially, you know, older generation veterans tend to struggle with the bootstrap mentality. And then on top of that, you're taught not to question your superiors or your supervisors. And in the military healthcare system, you see your healthcare providers as your superior. And so veterans have to be taught to be their own advocates. It's not something that comes natural to most of us, because usually if you talk back to a supervisor, you're getting yelled at, or you're, you know, it's corporal punishment time. You're down on the ground doing push-ups. And so there's two military cultural mindsets that I think are a part of this as well.
And so what happens to, in a given situation, if a medicine's not available on the formulary, is there an exceptions process, or is there a way for the person to get access to their treatment?
I'll answer that. Yeah, there is. But unfortunately, hardly anyone knows about it. It's not something a provider offers to you. It's not something that the VA educates veterans about. I only happen to know because I serve as an advocate, and I do receive a medication that's not on the formulary. And it has to go through a process where you explain why it needs to be this medication, and they have to really be able to justify why it's needed. But for some of the more expensive medications, that can be a heck of a battle, and veterans just are either too tired or don't have the energy to continue to fight. Some people, it can take a year or two to get something off formulary through the approval process. So yes, it does exist. Most don't know that they can access it, and for some, it's a very difficult process to navigate.
And I would jump in and say that that's if you're obtaining your care through the VA system. For people who are receiving care through the military health system and need a medication that's not on the formulary, there is no clear appeals process.
Wow.
There's a process by which the Defense Health Agency determines which medications are and are not on the formulary. And if they determine that there are lower cost for products that have the same medical benefit, they will exclude a medication from the formulary. And there isn't an appeals process at present for that. So, we do hear from retirees, for example, who, have been prescribed medication and can't obtain it because it's not available through the MHS formulary.
Wow, that's a significant challenge. And I think, Maureen, you said in some cases it can take a year to get access to a treatment. And if you're diagnosed with prostate cancer, you may not have that year of in between. So certainly appreciate that you are an advocate and hopefully able to make change in those areas. Ali, one thing that you mentioned briefly was around clinical trials. How frequently or how often are you hearing that your veterans are offered opportunities to be in trials or encouraged to participate in clinical trials?
So we actually did our first survey of veterans in late 2019, early 2020, and it was a smaller survey. It, I would say, opened up more questions than it really answered. But one of the things it really raised for us was it was very clear in that survey that veterans were not being offered the opportunity to participate in clinical trials. We know, especially you have a precision oncology program, it's clinical research in VA facilities. There ought to be opportunities, and it's not something we were seeing the veterans were reporting they had the opportunity to do. So I want to be careful to talk about the data from this year since I am still waiting on that final analysis. And I am looking forward to seeing some of the stratification by different groups, who is or isn't offered the opportunity. But the top line, what we're getting from it is it's a relatively small proportion, maybe less than 20% of respondents did say that they were offered the opportunity to talk about a clinical trial. Obviously, a smaller number than that is eligible, right? So just because you know about clinical trials doesn't mean you're actually a good fit for one. But if you don't know about them, if you're not talking to your doctor, right, you're not going to find out if you are a fit. So it's something I think we're looking forward to the full survey analysis, and it's a question that we'll be looking at more closely, right? What are the ways that we can improve access to clinical trials? What are the gaps in terms of, how we can better educate veterans, how we can better connect them? And I think there's work to be done, and we'll figure out exactly what that is, right? How to thread that needle.
Excellent. So I think talking earlier, Mark, you said that once you get into the VA system, the care is fantastic. Tell us what you mean by that, sort of getting into the system.
Well, sometimes it's paperwork to find out if you really qualify, trying to get an appointment for just your initial screening. I have an aunt that she was in the VA system, and it took, I think, 3 months for her to get an actual MRI because the equipment that they had at Lackland Air Force Base was moved to Brooks Air Force Base, and she couldn't get an appointment into Brooks because all her records were in Lackland. But once she got over to Brooks, they're able to they have the great machine, and they got everything in, and then they were able to start treating her, and everything was working well. But there's a lot of little hiccups, a lot of red tape. Like you heard somebody mention, sometimes a veteran had to go from South Carolina to Chicago, back to wherever. And that's the problem that they have, is trying to get in. But once they are treated and they get into the system, then the treatment, and then you create a treatment plan, and that's great. It's great care, but it's getting in, and that's sometimes hard, or making the appointments. And if you're late for an appointment, God forbid, but it's okay if you're sitting in that lobby for like 3-4 hours. But if you're late, then you're going to have to come back a different time. I don't know, Maureen, if you've experienced that, but you could be. I've gone for just a checkup, and I just block off the whole day. My appointment may be at 0900. I may not be seen till 1:30 in the afternoon. So I just know that you're going to just make a day out of it.
There does tend to be this veterans don't work kind of mentality at the VA. I've been using VA Care for about 1.5 years now, and you don't make your own appointments. The VA tells you when your appointment will be. And sometimes the waits for those appointments are very long, but if you're a minute or two late for yours, it will be recanceled and rescheduled. And but I can say the quality of care, to give you a comparison. So I use TRICARE for a lot of my health because I am a military spouse and I have a back problem. And through TRICARE, I get pain management, I get physical therapy or occupational therapy and medications if I so desire. I get all of that through the VA, but then they also have sent a pillow to help me sleep at night. And they have sent a heating pad to provide some relief. And they check to see how this physical injury is impacting my mental health. So they definitely provide very thorough trauma-informed wraparound care that is really beautiful. Whereas as a military family member, sometimes, and Eileen, this is my own perception, there's no research, but you kind of feel like you're the baggage that comes with the service member and not the highest priority within the healthcare system, which can be frustrating. When Eileen talked about the formulary and prescriptions, to give you an example, every time we move, I have to go through a prescription process. So I have to go through step therapy every single time I move, because the new provider doesn't seem to believe the records of the previous provider, despite the fact that I've been on one specific prescription for over a decade. Every time I move, I have to go through step therapy. And so there's a lot of work that can be done to provide better care for the military families. And Eileen, I see you've come off mute. I'll punt it to you.
No, I just think that you raised some really interesting points in terms of what the missions of the two systems are. And I think your experience really illustrates, the mission of the VA is to serve the veteran, right? Whereas the mission of the military health system is a little bit more complex in the sense that, they are there to ensure that we have a ready medical force and medically ready force. So their focus is on the health and well-being of the service member, and also ensuring that the care providers are trained and ready and able to meet the needs of the force. And so as family members, part of the reason that we're seen within the military health system is to provide clinical experience to those care providers. And so I think that can lead to a somewhat different experience, kind of like the one that you allude to, which is not to say that the providers aren't excellent, because I think there's a lot of data showing that care provided within the military health system is as good or better than care provided in the civilian sector. There's just been a report released showing that patients who receive care within the military health system have as good or better outcomes than beneficiaries who are seen in the civilian network. But I think it's just important to keep in mind that the mission of the military health system is not primarily to care for us as family members. It's primarily to ensure that the force is medically ready and that the care providers are ready to go and prepared for that combat environment.
And Michele, I'd like to add something there. The VA system, just like Maureen indicated, they kind of go a little, they take it a couple steps further. Well, a couple of years ago, they created an actual family, what is it? They created an actual family caregiver education program, and they actually created liaisons at the VA hospital to help educate the family caregiver that's dealing with that veteran. And a lot of places just don't do that. So they will give you the training to help you understand this is the process. This is some of the treatments that your family member is going through, and they also understand the stress of being a military spouse, especially for a veteran. But so they've taken it a step further and created this program, so which has really been great to actually participate in.
Right. And certainly, Eileen, the wonderful programs that your organization offers and provides. I mean, I think in many ways that is also wraparound care, right? It sounds like and those programs, I would imagine, are developed perhaps to identify gaps in the current systems.
Right. I mean, that's, we develop our programs based on what we hear from families in terms of what their needs are. And certainly, we're always glad to hear stories like Maureen's that families and kids have benefited from being able to attend one of our programs. But, what we're able to offer can't be a substitute for medical care available, that families need to obtain through the military health system. I think organizations like ours and programs like ours are an important supplement, but we have to focus on making sure that veterans and military families can get the right care from the right provider at the right time.
Absolutely.
I'd love to touch on that too. I'll just be completely transparent here. During the COVID, we moved from California to Virginia, and then the kids went into online school. My 16-year-old daughter struggled hard with suicide. We were in and out of the hospital for months. There was only one DoD adolescent PHP program in the nation. One.
Wow.
One, and they can have 12 kids at a time. So that means the rest of these kids are shuffled out to other programs. Many of them end up going across state boundaries so that they can get either a residential or a PHP program, which to me shows that there's more that the DoD or the TRICARE side can be doing to ensure that the families are well provided for, not just physical, but mental health wise.
Absolutely. And for those who may not be familiar, PHP is a partial hospitalization program. So generally a day program for people in intensive psychiatric or behavioral therapy and treatment. So how are things going now?
They're going good. Luckily, we were able to get her into that program. And so far we've been without a hospital visit for 3 months. So counting our stars, we're seeing her get excited about life again. School is in person, which I think helps. They're masking and she's vaccinated, but we're definitely seeing some resilience come back to her. And it's really fun to see her smile again, because it was a long time before we saw that.
Gosh, I can't imagine. And tell us a little bit about, you said you have these 3 wonderful daughters, all of whom were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. What's been your journey as a mom getting them care through the military system?
So I have 1 boy and 2 girls.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure he's recognized. It's a lot better now than it used to be. When they were first diagnosed with autism, it was a fight to get them into services, the waiting lists. One of our biggest challenges, and one of the biggest challenges most militaries face, is when you move, you're ripped from the resources that you had. And unfortunately, you're put on the waiting list and there's no prioritization given. So a lot of times, by the time my kids made the priority list, they'd be in therapy for 3 months for autism. We'd PCS again, and then we went to the bottom of a list. they luckily have a very aggressive mother who's not afraid to like drop everything and show up the day they have a cancellation, but not every parent can do that. There has been kind of a shift, and we're starting to, at least I'm starting to hear from other families in the community, that TRICARE isn't being as generous as they used to be with things like ABA therapy. And there's definitely some revisions that could be made to the Exceptional Family Member Program, which is kind of a support program that the DoD has for family members who have special healthcare needs, not just autism, to make that a more robust and more helpful program. But it, you know, the one of the things I wanted to hit is, for those of us that have chronic or complex healthcare needs, being a military family is super hard because you're moving all the time. And a lot of that purchased care that Eileen talked about, that paperwork doesn't make it back into your healthcare folder. And so I have years worth of medical history that's lost. And for a dependent, that can be problematic because you can't show all the therapies they've been through and whatnot. But as a veteran who's trying to establish service connection or trying to show that my service connected condition has gotten more complex or gotten worse, the loss of those records mean it's going to be much more of a battle for me to establish that service connection or get that rating increased, because the DoD is not making sure that that paperwork comes with me and with our family everywhere that we go. I'm sure Eileen hears about that a lot too. So there's a lot of work to be done in the medical records arena to make it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that you bring up is, you know, we hear so often. The issues of continuity of care for military family members in general, because as you say, you know, if you're PCSing every couple of years, it's obviously you're changing providers. You know, Mark mentioned the issue of providers changing often through the VA system. We see the same thing through the military health system, especially because a lot of the providers are also service members, and so they will move to new locations. And so on both ends that you see issues with continuity of care. And then, you know, the story you tell about moving to a new location, having to establish a new primary care provider, get a referral for specialty care, and then, which is most 9 times out of 10 going to be, you know, something that you have to seek out in the purchase care network, you know, and then having to go to the bottom of the wait list. That's just an ongoing chronic issue that we see with families, and it's really difficult to resolve.
So for those of us, I gather PCS is a relocation. What does it
Oh,
stand
sorry,
for?
permanent change of station, military ordered move.
Got it. But it's permanent for only as long as you're there, and then it's permanent somewhere else.
Right. Permanent is actually kind of a misnomer in this case. I never thought of that before, but it's true.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that. Did you have something you were going to add, Mark?
No.
Oh, wasn't sure if you. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to make sure anybody who's participating can put a question in the chat if you have one, or a comment or anything you'd like to add. As we, in the last few minutes that we have here, I would like to talk a little bit about something I did not get to in your biographical sketch because it is a page long, Maureen, and that is that you have been selected for multiple fellowships. So the Veterans and Global Leadership Fellowship and the Hgva Fellowship, all kinds of different things. Can you talk a little bit about those opportunities? I think they're really wonderful and something that, you know, be great to hear about in case there are other veterans who might be able to apply for those types of programs.
Sure. The Hgva Veteran Advocacy Fellowship is a fellowship that takes 5 veterans a year and trains them on how to become a national advocate. So when I first actually applied for the program, I didn't know what advocacy was. And, you know, the gentleman in the class with me, one had run for office, one had already had a bill passed. And I was like, I can't tell the difference between the House and the Senate. Like, I'm not sure I can do this, but I stuck it through. And by the end of the week, I had visited 8 congressional offices. And at the time I was advocating for the VA to have more complementary alternative modalities available for complex PTSD, which now there's lots of, and that's not just because of me, a lot of people have advocated for that. But it was there that I learned the power of my voice as a veteran. And, you know, when you go on Capitol Hill and you've served our country and you go in to talk to the congressmen and women, there's a certain power or weight that comes with that because they know that I signed that blank check to put my life on the line for the country. And so they lean in a little more. and having the power of storytelling helps them lean in a little more because I've learned how to suck them in and tug on their heartstrings a little. And then the Veterans in Global Leadership was a wonderful fellowship because it basically exposed you to the who's who in DC as far as leadership goes from all different sectors. And so you got an opportunity to kind of hear about the unusual journeys that many of those leaders took in their career. And they also kind of became sponsors for us as many of us were student veterans at the time. We're getting ready to just launch our careers. It's hard to believe that I just started my career basically January of 2018, and I've gone from 2 of the big 6 BSOs to working on Capitol Hill. It still blows my mind that that's the trajectory my career has gone. And I think a lot of it has been due to those fellowships and internships. And I think one day I would love to work with organizations to help train advocates, not just in veterans, but military spouses, because I think they are an absolutely untapped advocacy potential out there. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Wonderful. Absolutely. And I can't think of a better note to end our conversation on. I don't see any questions in the chat. So Allie, Eileen, Mark, and Maureen, thank you so much for giving us your time today. As Mark says, go Army, although don't tell, John Crowley, I said that. My father, it was a Navy veteran, so I really shouldn't be saying go Army. But what about the Air Force game, Mark? Give us your thoughts on that. How's that going to go?
Well, Army's going to win. I mean, I don't understand.
All right. Well, never mind then.
Why you're asking that question.
Thank you so much, everybody. We will see you next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.